When we evoke Pan-Africanism, the collective imagination often conjures male figures: Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, Patrice Lumumba, or W.E.B. Du Bois. These men were undeniably pillars of the movement. Yet, reducing the history of Pan-Africanism to these male faces alone would be a profound historical error. Who remembers that the first armed resistance to British colonization in West Africa was led by a woman, the Queen Mother Yera Santwe of the Ashanti Kingdom? Who knows that Queen Nzinga of Ndongo and Matamba, in the 17th century, waged a 30-year war against the Portuguese colonizers using strategic alliances and guerrilla tactics? Pan-Africanism, in its purest essence, is a movement of total liberation. It is not only about liberating territories, but about liberating minds, and this includes the liberation of women from the double burden of colonialism and patriarchy. This course, designed for high school sophomores, aims to revisit Pan-Africanism through the lens of feminism and inclusion. We will discover that African women have never been mere spectators of history. They have been its main actors, strategists, fighters, and intellectuals. From armed resistance to diplomatic struggle, from poetry to science, women have shaped the continent and the dream of its unity. As suggested by the spirit of the documents from the Alkebulan Academy Library, whose excerpts evoke journeys, quests for meaning, and stories of exceptional lives, we will undertake a journey through time and space. We will explore how women used their voices, their pens, and their courage to defend African dignity. This course does not merely list names. It offers a structural analysis. How did colonial patriarchy attempt to erase women's roles? How did women circumvent these obstacles? And above all, how can 21st century Pan-Africanism be truly inclusive, recognizing that Africa's liberation is inseparable from women's liberation? We will see that the struggle for African unity is also a struggle for gender equality. This course is a tribute to all these unsung heroines, and a call to a new generation of Pan-Africanists, boys and girls, to build a united, free, and just Africa for all. SEP The Forgotten Founders, Armed Resistance and Female Sovereignty, 17th to 19th centuries. The first part of our exploration takes us back to a time when the notion of Pan-Africanism was not yet formalized, but the spirit of resistance and African sovereignty was already alive. Women, often at the head of powerful kingdoms, were the first to embody this struggle. Take the example of Queen Nzinga, or Ngozi Ndongo and Matamba, in present-day Angola.
And she succeeded in maintaining her kingdom's independence. Her story, often reduced to folkloric anecdotes, is in reality a lesson in political and military strategy. She was not only a queen, but also a war chief, a diplomat, and a strategist. She understood that resistance could not be only military, it also had to be cultural and political. Another emblematic example is that of Yasantua, Queen Mother of Ejisu, in the Ashanti Empire, present-day Ghana. In 1900, the British, having already weakened Ashanti power, demanded the surrender of the golden stool, the sacred symbol of the nation. The Ashanti chiefs were divided, some ready to negotiate. It was then that Yasantua spoke. She delivered a famous speech: "Now I see that some of you are afraid to fight for our king. If you, the men, will not rise, we, the women, will. I will call my companions. We will fight. We will fight the white men until the last of us falls on the battlefield." This speech is a Pan-Africanist act before its time. It calls for the unity of the Ashanti people against a common enemy, and it challenges patriarchal structures by proclaiming that courage has no gender. She led the War of the Golden Stool, a revolt that lasted several months, and although she was captured and exiled, her act of bravery became a symbol for the entire continent. These examples show that resistance to colonization and oppression often had a female face. These women were fighting not only for their kingdom, but for an idea of African sovereignty and dignity. They laid the first stones of an edifice that would become modern Pan-Africanism. Their legacy is proof that Africa's history is rich with women leaders, warriors, and decision-makers, and that their erasure from historical narratives is a violence done to the continent's memory. The intellectuals and artisans of unity, poetesses, writers, and activists, 20th century. The 20th century saw the emergence of a structured Pan-Africanism, with congresses, journals, and organizations. While men were often the visible figureheads, women played a crucial role in the shadows and in the light. One of the most important figures is Amy Ashwood Garvey, first wife of Marcus Garvey. Often overshadowed by her husband, she was nonetheless one of the co-founders of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA. It was she who organized the first meetings and provided crucial logistical and ideological support. She was a powerful orator and an outstanding organizer, and she campaigned all her life for the unity of black peoples and for women's rights. She also founded the newspaper The Blackman and was a leading figure in international black feminism. A
revolution and a reappropriation of African identity. She was not content to be a muse, she was a theorist in her own right. She wrote, "Martinican poetry will be cannibal or it will not be." This strong phrase shows her desire to devour colonial influences to create something new and authentic. She was also one of the first to link the anti-colonial struggle to the feminist struggle. Later, in the 1960s and 1970s, figures like Wangari Maathai in Kenya embodied an ecological and feminist Pan-Africanism. Founder of the Green Belt movement, she linked deforestation, poverty, and the oppression of women. She showed that planting trees was a political act, it empowered women, preserved the environment, and fought against economic dependence. She was the first African woman to receive the Nobel Peace Prize, and her struggle was deeply Pan-Africanist. She believed that Africa's rebirth depended on the rebirth of its ecosystems and rural communities, often led by women. Finally, it is impossible not to mention figures like South African activist Winnie Mandela, who was a pillar of the anti-apartheid struggle, or Liberian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the first elected female head of state in Africa. Sirleaf, nicknamed the Iron Lady, embodied Liberia's rebirth after years of civil war. Her journey shows that women can lead nations and embody the Pan-Africanist ideals of peace, development, and unity. These intellectuals and activists demonstrated that Pan-Africanism is not only a matter of politics, but also of culture, poetry, ecology, and daily life. Systematic erasure, how colonial patriarchy wove the silence. To understand why Pan-Africanist women are so little known, we must analyze the mechanisms of erasure. This is not a coincidence. Colonialism was not only economic and political domination, it was also epistemic domination, that is, a way of producing and controlling knowledge. The colonizers, coming from patriarchal European societies, imposed their worldview. In many pre-colonial African societies, women had important political, economic, and religious roles. They were village chiefs, queens, warriors, and traders. The colonial system systematically dismantled these structures. For example, the British in West Africa preferred to negotiate only with men, deliberately ignoring women's authority. This created a power imbalance that persisted after independence. Colonial historians then wrote history focusing on men's actions, relegating women to the roles of mothers, wives, or folkloric queen mothers. The stories of warrior women like Nzinga and Yasantua were minimized, presented as exceptions or anomalies. Worse, some were ridiculed or demonized. The same phenomenon occurred in the modern Pan-Africanist movement.
After her divorce, Suzanne Césaire stopped writing after the war, crushed by social expectations. It is only recently that feminist historians and activists have undertaken a work of rehabilitation. This work involves digging through archives, rereading texts with a critical eye, and giving women back their voice. It is an act of historical justice. Because without this rehabilitation, our understanding of Pan-Africanism is incomplete and biased. It does not account for the diversity of actors and actresses, nor for the complexity of struggles. As high school sophomores, you must understand that history is never neutral. It is written by those who hold power. Questioning this writing is already a political act. It is refusing to accept a single, fixed version of the past. It is seeking the voices that have been silenced. And that is where the true spirit of Pan-Africanism lies, a quest for truth and total liberation. Contemporary applications, inclusive Pan-Africanism in the 21st century. Today, Pan-Africanism can no longer be thought of without a feminist and inclusive dimension. The continent's challenges are immense: poverty, conflicts, climate change, gender inequalities. Solutions can only come from the participation of all. The concept of intersectionality, developed by American legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, is essential here. It explains that oppressions, racism, sexism, classes are not separate but overlap. A poor black woman in Africa suffers from racism, inherited from colonialism, sexism, in her society, and classism, in the global economic system. A truly liberating Pan-Africanism must take this complexity into account. Movements like Me Too in Africa, or struggles for LGBTQ+ rights on the continent, are extensions of Pan-Africanism. They fight against all forms of domination. Contemporary figures like Ugandan activist Stella Nyanzi, who defied the government of Yoweri Museveni using poetry and the body as protest tools, embody this new Pan-Africanism. She was imprisoned for criticizing the president, and she continues to fight for freedom of expression and women's rights. Similarly, economists like Senegalese Ndongo Samba Sylla or Kenyan Akinyi Ocheng advocate for real economic independence for Africa, linking feminism to monetary and food sovereignty. Artists like Nigerian singer Tiwa Savage or Senegalese director Rama Thior use their art to tell stories of strong and complex women, far from clichés. 21st century Pan-Africanism is also digital. Social media allows an unprecedented circulation of ideas. Hashtags like Pan-African Women or African Feminism connect activists from across the continent. This creates a new form of unity, no longer based on physical congresses, but on networks of exchange and solidarity. As 8.
Biases in your textbooks, you become actors of this inclusive Pan-Africanism. You show that Africa's unity cannot be achieved without equality between men and women. It is a struggle for justice, and this struggle is for everyone. To go further in our analysis, it is crucial to understand how the documents from the Alkebulan Academy Library, although not Pan-Africanist texts per se, can be read with a Pan-Africanist and feminist eye. Take the excerpt from the book 12 Years a Slave, which is not in the source, but the provided document is another text, The Game and the Candle. The document 12 Years Slave.epub is actually another text, but the spirit of the question invites us to a critical reading. Imagine we are reading a narrative of slavery. A feminist Pan-Africanist reading would not simply denounce slavery as a horror. It would focus on the specific experience of enslaved women. How was sexual violence a tool of domination? How did women maintain family and cultural ties despite everything? How did some use motherhood as a form of resistance? The document africaslavetrade.epub, which is actually frank among the rancheros, could be analyzed for its representation of power and gender relations in a frontier context. As for the document africanamericanpoetry.epub, which is a tramp sketches, it evokes journeys, spiritual quests. A feminist Pan-Africanist reading could see in it a metaphor for the inner journey of African women in search of their identity and liberation. Stephen Graham's text, although not African, speaks of the condition of the tramp, the seeker of meaning. One can see a parallel with the quest of African women to reclaim their history and voice. The deepening of this course therefore invites you to adopt a method of critical reading. Never take a text at face value. Always ask yourself, who is speaking? Who is being spoken about? Who is absent? What biases are at work? This method is at the heart of Pan-Africanist and feminist thought. It allows you to become active readers and citizens, capable of deconstructing dominant discourses. Another subject for deepening is the question of language. French, English, and Portuguese, colonial languages, are the official languages of most African states. How have African women writers used these languages to subvert colonial discourse and express their identity? How have authors like Mariama Ba, So Long a Letter, or Khaled Bayala, The Little Prince of Belleville, used French to denounce patriarchy and neo-colonialism? Their work is an act of linguistic and cultural reappropriation. Finally, we must question current challenges. Pan-Africanist feminism is sometimes criticized as a Western import.
Ism, rooted in local realities and histories, while being open to global influences. It is this dialectic between tradition and modernity, between local and global, that makes the richness of contemporary Pan-Africanism. To understand and remember this course, here are some methods and tips. First, create a timeline of Pan-Africanist female figures, from Nzinga in the 17th century to Ellen Johnson Sirleaf in the 21st century. Place key events, congresses, independence in it. This will help you visualize the continuity of the struggle. Second, use the technique of mind maps. In the center, write Feminine Pan-Africanism. Around it, draw branches: Armed Resistance, Nzinga, Yasantawa, Intellectuals, Amy Garvey, Suzanne Césaire, Ecology, Wangari Maathai, Politics, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. For each branch, add keywords, dates, quotes. This will allow you to make connections between different periods and fields. Third, to review, test yourself with the provided QCMs, try to answer without looking at the course. For open-ended questions, write summary paragraphs. Finally, adopt an active posture. When you read an article or watch a documentary about Africa, systematically ask yourself, where are the women in this narrative? If they are absent, why? This habit of questioning is the most important skill you can acquire. It is at the heart of the historical method in Pan-Africanist critical thinking. To go further, I recommend several readings and lines of thought. First, read the novel So Long a Letter by Mariama Ba. It is a foundational text of African feminism, telling the story of a Senegalese woman facing polygamy and emancipation. Next, read Half of a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, which tells the story of the Biafran War in Nigeria through the eyes of two sisters. It is a novel about violence, loss, and resilience. For a more theoretical approach, read African Feminisms edited by Fatou. So this collective work explores different forms of feminism on the continent. You can also watch documentaries. Look for Mama Africa about Miriam Makeba, or The Women's War about the women's revolt in South Africa. For a line of thought, question the place of women in current Pan-African institutions like the African Union. How many women are heads of state? Ministers? Commissioners? Is this inequality changing? Finally, get involved. Join a debate club on African issues, follow activists on social media, attend conferences. Pan-Africanism is a living movement, and you can be its actors. Never forget that history is not fixed. It's